My name is Joyce Volk. I'm Chair-elect of the Salina Area Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. So I want to welcome you all here, and we appreciate your attendance and your interest in local elections. Our sponsors tonight are the Salina League of Women Voters and the Salina Area Chamber of Commerce. And tonight, excuse me, we're going to feature the candidates for the state legislature from District 69 and the uncontested 71st and 108 districts. We do have printed profiles in the back of the room for each one of the candidates. Looks like this. And then also the League of Women Voters have placed a card on your chair. And the reason that they have done that is because you can also find the profiles on their website as well. So we are going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce State Legislature from the 69th District, J.R. Claeys, and his opponent, Jarrett Morris. State Legislature 71st District, unopposed, Diana Dirks. And State Legislature 108th District, unopposed, Steve Johnson. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Ann Zimmerman from the League of Women Voters. She's going to go over the rules and all the other fussy stuff we have involved.
Thank you. My name is Ann Zimmerman. I'm the Vice President of the Salina League of Women Voters. My job right now is to go over the rules. We start with 1 minute opening remarks by each candidate, and then we will alternate candidates answering the questions. The opening remarks will start with JR. The first question will go to Jarrett Morris, and the third will start with Diana, and the fourth will start with Stephen, and then we'll start over again. You get the idea. This first set of questions will come from the media panel, which comes from Salina Post, Salina Journal. Did you already introduce them? No. Jason Beats is here from the Salina Journal. And Leslie Eichelberry from Salina Post, and Todd Pittenger from Rockingham Media. Thank you. While they are asking their questions and the candidates are answering them, you in the audience will be writing out your questions on the scratch pads that ProntoPrint has provided us on the chairs. And the league members around the edges will be picking up your questions, so you can hold them up or you can pass them to the ends of the rows so they can pick them up. So that by the time we finish with the media questions, I will have some of those questions from the audience up here ready to ask. The questions have to pertain to all the candidates. They can't be specific to one candidate. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer the question, and at the end of this process, which will come at about 7:45 or 7:50, then we'll have the 1 minute closing remarks from each candidate. And so I'm going to start by moderating the opening remarks. So we're going to start. And let me just tell you about the timers over here. The League of Women Voters provides the timers, Bruce and Margaret Wyatt. And when we ask the question, the green card goes up, which means go. And when we have 20 seconds left, the yellow card will go up. And when the time is up, not only will the red card go up, but probably someone will be telling you to stop talking. So, unless you've already stopped, which is fine. There's probably something else I should have told you, like thank you for coming, and we're glad you're here, and we're glad all the candidates showed up. So, JR, go ahead. JR Claeys.
All right. Thank you. Thank you to the Salina Chamber of Commerce, the League of Women Voters, our moderators, our timekeepers, our question askers, and everyone who came out today. Really appreciate you being here and look forward to the questions. My name is J.R. Claeys. I am the representative from the 69th District. I have been your representative for 6 years. In that district, I serve as the chairman of the Transportation and Public Safety Budget Committee that handles the budgets for KDOT and our public safety agencies like the Highway Patrol, the National Guard, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. I also serve on the Appropriations Committee that does all of our budgets for the entire state. I serve on the Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development Committee. I serve as the Vice Chairman of the State Building Construction Committee, which includes all state building construction, including that on our university campuses. And then I also serve on the Kansas UAS Task Force and the Transportation Vision Task Force, which is creating our next 10-year transportation plan. Won't eat up my entire minute. I appreciate the opportunity. I did. Oh, all right. Fantastic.
Thank you. Jarrett Morris.
Thank you, and thank you for everybody being here today. My name is Jarrett Morris, and I'm running for the 69th District, Kansas House of Representatives. We have two visions that we're going to see tonight. One of somebody that has followed the Sam Brownback disastrous tax plan to its bitter end, and somebody that is a 30-year resident of the community, community leader, and somebody who has helped to build a successful business in downtown Salina. Now, there are two things that people in this community have been asking for time and time again, and that's that we get Medicaid expanded and that we make sure that our public schools are fully funded. And I know this directly because I've been knocking on doors since early this spring and attending events. And time again, the message has been the same. Whether it was a Democrat, a Republican, or an unaffiliated voter, they're ready to get these two issues taken care of. And that's what I intend to work for, among other things, in the legislature. Thanks for being here tonight. I look forward to this discussion, and I'll ask for your vote.
Thank you. Diana Dirks.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. It's great to be able to see these chairs at least halfway and three-quarters full. Thank you for everyone who is participating and assisting in getting this together so that you have an opportunity to listen to us and perhaps answer some of the questions that have been in your mind for quite some time. I'm Diana Dirks. I serve the 71st District. I have served 6 years. I was just blessed that this time I do not have an opponent, but yet I am still out knocking on doors, visiting with my constituents, because I feel that this is where the heart is. This is what we need to know, what the needs and things that are important to our constituents. And so therefore, I want to go out and knock and ask those questions so that I be able to answer them and be prepared when I go back in January. So thank you so much for being here, and I'm looking forward to your questions. And I wanted to tell you that I did have a packet. There's 20 packets in the back that puts out the exact numbers for the educational finance and where the
Thank you.
finances go.
Thank you. Stephen Johnson.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone who made it out tonight and to the Chamber and the League for organizing. I know things don't just happen, so thank you for being there. I've served for 8 years now and have focused largely on just the numbers stuff, which is the easier stuff. You can look at what that is. Anyway, so we've made good progress in pensions. I don't necessarily feel I need to bore you with the details, but if you have questions, I'm glad to go into it. And then working with tax, there's not a specific answer to how much we spend or where we spend it. That is a big discussion, but just making sure that the equation balances has been important to me in the work that we've done on the tax committee. I chair the tax committee currently in the House. I'm the vice chair of the Joint Pension Committee, and those are the key roles that I've served. We've had some good forums across the state today, and glad to get to be here tonight.
Thank you. Joyce.
I'm going to keep this simple. So I'm going to you're going to start, Jason, and Stephen, you're going to start so I can remember which direction we're going. So how this will operate is that each of you will get a question, and then, for instance, Jason, you'll ask, Stephen will answer, and then so on. And then, Leslie, you'll ask a question, and then Diana will start, and I'll have to try to keep track of where we are, and I hope you'll help me as well so I don't goof that up. But anyway, Jason, first question.
First of all, can everyone hear me? Okay. In 2012, Governor Brownback signed into law income tax cuts that he said would be a shot of adrenaline into the heart of the Kansas economy. The Kansas legislature repealed many of those tax cuts last year. Do you support those income tax cuts?
So just to clarify the question, I would assume, did I support the tax cuts of 2012?
Yes.
Yeah, and I did not. I voted for the repeal in 2017 and worked to lead that effort.
Same question?
Yes.
Okay. No, I did not support the 2012 tax what happened there. And we are just now getting so that we can dig ourselves out of that proverbial hole and get back to the services. I'm a staunch supporter of education and Medicaid expansion. We almost had it, people, and we're going to try again this next session. We're going to make sure at least we can have some conversation, and just getting it above the line is the difficult part. But I'm going to be ready and able to stand my stand and support the people back home and let them know that these are the important cases that we need to have. And it's all about the numbers.
Had I been in the legislature in 2012, I would not have supported those tax cuts. And had I been there last year, I would have voted for the repeal of them. And also, Governor Brownback, when he vetoed that, I would have voted to sustain that, or to overturn the veto.
No, I do not support and did not support that. I wasn't in office when the vote took place, but I support lower taxes for everyone, and that particular tax cut was not lower taxes for everyone. That was lower taxes for a certain segment of people and higher taxes for others. I also opposed the sales tax increases that were brought time and again to solve for that problem.
Thank you. Leslie?
As state leaders, what do you plan to do to end the divisiveness of politics and unite all Kansans?
Well, I think we had a great beginning by formulating the Women's Caucus when it came time to do the tax bill. They were just stalled. And we got together. There were originally 5 of us, and pretty soon we had a whole committee room full of individuals who were giving suggestions on what we needed to do to get an ample tax bill formulated that's not going to be a burden on the taxpayers, and be sure that some of those services that are so desperately needed in some communities are funded adequately. So I think we've already got to start there by being bipartisan and reaching across the aisle and working with our colleagues when it comes to those important issues, because the big picture is that we serve the people who put us in office, and we need to do our job.
Communication is key on this. I really believe, you'll hear me refer back, I'm sure, many times tonight to the amount of doors that we knocked on this summer. And it didn't matter if I was talking to a Republican, unaffiliated voter, Democrat. They're all sick of this. I mentioned earlier in the remarks that the 2 biggest things that people are interested in are Medicaid expansion and making sure public schools are funded. But seriously, the number 3 thing was people are sick and tired of all this crud getting thrown back and forth all the time. I think if we could all get together, sit down, we would figure out that there are more things that we agree on together. And if we can get to that point, then we can maybe sit down and have a good conversation about a lot of the things that we disagree with. Talking about this mess of partisanship and stuff, I want everybody to know that when it came time to make mail purchases, the mail that was going to show up at your house, I specifically told the people I bought my mail from that I didn't want any photoshopped mail and so on.
Well, I'll share a little story. The State Building Construction Committee, the leadership positions on that are actually elected because it's a committee between the Senate and the House, and I serve on vice chair of that because the folks on both sides of the aisle unanimously elected me to that position. In fact, my nomination was seconded by Laura Kelly, the senator who's currently running for governor on the Democrat ticket. I think a lot of the divisiveness happens in elections and doesn't necessarily happen up in the State House. I work with Democrats on a frequent basis. In fact, particularly in the Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development Committee, where many of our goals are aligned and our path to get there are similar. Sometimes we all have the same goal in mind, but a different path, and that's where we divide. But I think that typically lends itself to the electoral process more so than it does actually up in the Capitol, where we all get along pretty well, in fact.
So I think it starts individual and how you interact. I've been really fortunate on both pension and tax to have exceptional ranking minority members to get to work with, and that's been key to being able to actually accomplish things. And so then talking with them, I think, helps to finish the whole picture. But I think it deals just with respect, recognizing that when you start sensing that there's an us and a them, it's really just us. It is the state, it is Kansas. What do we want to do together, and how do we figure that out? And then I think as you get to those heated moments, you try and break it back down to policy and say, what is true? How does your plan work? Is there something better? And good policy doesn't know party. It's just whether the policy works.
Thank you, Todd.
In my mind, we're losing our best and our brightest here in Kansas. My son was the president of his graduating class at Salina South High School. This past spring, he graduated college, a graduating class of about 2,000. He was the top male undergraduate. All he's wanted to do his whole life is be a teacher. He is a teacher right now in Kansas City, making a difference in children's lives every day in Kansas City, Missouri. He specifically did not want to teach in Kansas because of the attitude, because of the constant battle going on over education at the state capitol in Topeka. What can we do? And I'm a little biased, more than a little biased. I think he's one of our best and brightest, but he specifically doesn't want to live in Kansas. What can we do to keep our best and brightest here in Kansas?
The very first thing we have to do is get our, make sure our schools are fully funded so that we can make sure that our teachers are making the best wages that we can afford here in the state of Kansas. I think we're lagging behind on that nationally, so we got to get those brought up. Other sticking points with educators are things like due process. If that comes up again, we'll get that taken care of. We just have to make sure that economically in our state that we're doing well, so that people, young people such as your son, will want to stay around, and then make sure that they have security in our schools.
You kind of have two questions there, and the one dealing with the schools I think is extremely important that we address, because I think the dollars need to make their way into classroom instruction, and that means teacher salaries. That's really primarily where we need to find ways to get the dollars to that purpose specifically. And my votes have consistently been in favor of putting the dollars towards classroom instruction, whether it be to teacher salaries or to technology in the classroom. But then the other piece to your question is just brain drain overall. When we see that our kids are moving to other states to get those jobs that are the higher paying engineering jobs. And we've had bills in the House. In fact, I led one through the House that incentivized kids going to Kansas universities, graduating with engineering degrees, and taking jobs in Kansas with those degrees. It worked in Oklahoma. It can work for us. But that didn't make it through the Senate. But we've got to keep pushing and trying to get those kinds of economic incentives out there so that we can get those jobs for our kids and give them the opportunity to stay here and work.
So I would actually be interested in the specifics of his situation and what he found and where that came out. Looking at the data from the Kansas Association of School Boards and others, the total compensation packages are not hugely different as we go state to state across our borders. So what are the other things that are there? And some of it is the messaging, and I think it's very important for us. The state is only as good as the people we're fortunate enough to employ. So it is that workforce that is critical across the board. We need to share that message. We need to celebrate that message. And then I think we all have to put down the arms race of what needs to be more, but celebrate those victories and say, how do we really achieve the things that we want? What will drive outcomes and results for staff, for students, et cetera? But as we look broader across it is having a package that is competitive for those folks. So we need to see what was missing.
On the back table, you will find a 17-page report. This is dealing with school funding, and I just wanted to, the difference between instruction and classroom. Just real quickly on my 1 minute. Instruction or teachers support students, counselors, nurses, transportation, food services, school administration, operations and maintenance, facilities acquisition, debt services, central services, general administration, other support. 53% are going into instruction. We have got to make sure that our teachers are adequately paid for the job that they have, because our schools and our kids are our future.
Earlier this year, the Kansas Supreme Court ruled that an education funding plan adopted by the legislature failed to adequately fund education in the state. The court ruled that the plan could be brought into compliance by adjusting for inflation. Do you support adding these additional funds for education?
That will be the big question.
Stephen, we're going to let JR go first. Sorry, I had to be a bully already.
Yes, I support adding the dollars for education. I voted in favor of one of the bills. I voted against one for another reason, but overall support putting the dollars into the classroom where they belong, as I mentioned earlier on an earlier question. But I think it's important that we address the court's objections, and I think that there were further objections, and that was part of why I voted against the last one, but voted for a previous version of it. I believe it's some portions of that were found unconstitutional that will need to be addressed.
And I'm not sure. I might not vote for the additional funding through that. The key to that, there's about $800 million that's been added directly to schools over the current time, $1 billion by the time you look at pension payments. It is the one thing that we're looking at for a full inflation rate. We're not looking at any inflation in other areas of the government. So how do I make sure that I know what the other things are that are on the table before I'm willing to commit to another $300 or $400 million in education? As you deal with the budget, it's kind of like a giant balloon. As I put any one pressure point on, I want to make sure I know what it does to the other pieces before I assure you to say, I will make sure that the money is there. I will work to make sure that I listen to what the key pressure points are and that we work to address those with education in the other areas of the state.
Well, I think after 6 years, you probably know how I feel about education. First and foremost, and it is a battle. There's been some sacrifices made, but I've also seen superintendents across the state, teachers leaving, going to outside our perimeters simply because of the inadequacy in their paying and being able to have enough funding to adequately take care of our kids in school. So I am a great advocate for as much money as we can get, but as it's used properly. And you get so many comments out when I'm knocking on doors, oh, well, you spend all this money on all these new schools. That's capital funds that they cannot use for in-class and instructions. So it's a separate entity. We need to make sure that now that we're actually on the road to perhaps getting more funds coming in, that we use them wisely, but make sure that our schools are adequately funded.
Direct answer to your question is yes, I would support additional funding. After the A&M study came out and said that we were coming up short on the funding, and then when the peer review showed up, it said that even that we were one of the most efficient states with our high school funding or with our public education. If we're efficient and we still need it, then I would support additional funding.
What is the most serious problem Kansas will face in the coming year, and what do you plan to do about it?
So the most serious problem, we can anticipate some, but oftentimes they come up during the year, and you have to be able to react to it. I think the big question right now is the education funding question, and it gets tied to the rest of the budget. And so then the key is there, what changes would you look at, would we want to look at in tax policy to get there? Currently, we're not able to make it through 2022 with the funding that we have already allocated. How do we make sure that that continues to balance? So my focus will be how that equation continues to balance and trying to make sure everyone is at the table and no one is on the table to figure out how to make that work.
think it comes down to the revenue stream. We finally are starting to hedge up now. The revenues are looking better than they have in the past. And it does make me a little nervous when there's talk about cutting taxes, cutting spending, again, trying to get out of that proverbial hole that we've dug ourselves into since 2012. And I think that is something that we have to be very watchful and careful, because there are a lot of other services other than education. There are people who are needing Medicaid expansion. There are people that need services within our communities, and there has to be adequate funding to maintain those. And so that's something that can go either way, and it's depending on how much money that we are able to generate and keep those revenue streams coming in to adequately pay for those services.
I would also say that the budget is probably the main concern. I think if I remember right, we're on 18 straight months of economic growth right now, and I'd like to see that continue. My answer may change about what the most important thing is after November 6th, but as of right now, that's what I would say, and I would like to see our economic growth continue.
Yeah, the growth of the Trump economy is certainly helping us out. There are competing interests, I think, that are extremely important that are going to come up across the next year, and I think a lot of it is budgetary, as has been said before. Schools, transportation, there could be a downturn in either of our biggest sectors, aviation or agriculture. But I think that also just pointing out that the next transportation plan is coming up. It'll likely come up for a vote in this next session. It will need a steady funding stream. It will need a way that we can fund that without sweeps, without the constant use of the Bank of KDOT, and coming back to that for the funding mechanism for other things inside the state budget. So I think that is going to be one of our primary concerns when we go back and try to figure out how to implement that plan. As I mentioned earlier, I serve on that task force that is developing that plan, whether it's a 5-year or a 10-year plan, but that replacement for T-Works is going to be a big deal for us, especially here in Saline County.
Todd?
3 of the 4 of you will end up going to Topeka. Now, no matter which 3 of the 4 go, you'll be working with the new governor. We'll have a new governor, whether it be Laura Kelly, whether it be Chris Kobach, or, I don't know, maybe even Greg Orman. But I'm going to say, of the 2 major candidates, Chris Kobach and Laura Kelly, which would you prefer to work with? Which would be better for Kansas for you to work with?
Diana? Pressure.
Oh, you like to do this to me, don't you? Actually, as I've been knocking on the doors, people ask me, well, who should I vote for? And as a government, representative, I really can't tell them. But I do share with them my fear about how things would turn out, with either one of them. One with the primary election, one, cutting taxes, cutting spending. The other one was taking away the right for these young folks that are children of undocumented people who live in our communities, that after 12 years of school, they were going to take away their opportunity to have in-state tuition, which not would only hurt them, but also hurt the regions that are looking for those students that, that can still pay to have a student, and they're not moving out of state to do so. So there are some worries and concerns among my constituents. And remember, I serve my constituency, and I think those are the individuals who need to be letting the legislators know how they feel about it and what we need to do. Thank you.
All living ex-governors, with the exception of Sam Brownback, have endorsed Laura Kelly. And about 24 state legislators have also endorsed Laura Kelly. I think they're telling us who the better person is to work with right now. And that's who I'm supporting, and that's who I think I would work best with.
Well, Todd, my vote's still up in the air. No, I kid. I joke. No, I would obviously rather prefer to work with a Republican. I think that our goals are aligned as far as what the Republican Party has to offer, and also having that level of access to get things done for Salina and Saline County when working with the opposing party and the executive branch, it's a lot more difficult to get things done for our community. And so I think it's important to remain with parity with a Republican governor working with Republican state legislators.
And to Ms. Eichelberry's earlier question, I think it's important to be able to work across whatever the situation would be. I would be happy to work with a Republican administration. I have had many good experiences working with Senator Kelly on both pension and tax policy, found her to be exceptionally competent in those areas and a big help to actually driving quality policy. So I would be happy to work with either. And when I get the question of whom to vote for, it's easy to lay out the issues. What I know is I can't tell you, but the choice is fairly clear, and you'll be able to make it. I also tell them you'll probably be really mad at me if I told you to vote for either one within about 6 months. So anyway.
Jason?
Some lawmakers support adopting a constitutional amendment to prevent the courts from ruling on the adequacy of education spending approved by the legislature. Would you support the adoption of such an amendment?
No, I would not. The legislature, it is their job to provide the funding for the schools, and obviously they do that. Then it's not, I think there's a misperception there that the courts are just jumping right in and making these decisions. That's not what's happening. The schools are then looking at the money that's being dealt or the funding that's being dealt to them and deciding that that is not adequate funding. And so then they have to take their case to the court, and the state's got to make their case as well. And the court gets to decide, and that's what's happening. So I would not support taking a constitutional amendment to remove that.
I support, in general, constitutional amendments coming before the people. The process is that you receive 84 votes in the House, 27 votes in the Senate, and then it actually goes to the ballot, so the people get to decide. And I think this is an important enough question that the people should be allowed to decide it.
So the key on this one is the wording. How do you figure out the right wording for this? And it is one that I would consider, but it does depend on the wording. When it was put together the last time, it was imperfect. We know that it was imperfect. The courts have demonstrated a huge ability to be able to rule on issues of equity and how that works. Adequacy becomes more of a challenge. And one of the challenges that an adequacy ruling creates is how do I then handle equity among collectively in the legislature among all of the other competing interests? Because if they were also able to bring a lawsuit, I think we would find that they are not adequately funded. So that is the one challenge that I think that the people do need to decide. I think as we look at our discussion of the issue, having that settled to say, here's how we're going to decide the amount would actually help to settle a lot of the angst we have around the education funding issue.
I believe that the reason you have a legislative body, both the legislators in the House and in the Senate, is because they know what the wants and needs of their individual communities and the people that they serve. I really truly feel that the Supreme Court is looking out for our education and the education of our kids. I think that there could be a compromise as to getting things done without having a constitutional amendment. If it comes down to that, I feel that it needs to be amongst the people and not so much geared towards what we say, but what they have to say, and that we need to listen to what their thoughts are in that regard.
Thank you. Leslie?
Hey, this came up a little bit earlier, that the economy has been growing. What do you see that needs to be done to keep that going, and what will you do to help that?
JR.
Yeah, there are several things that we can do to keep the economy going. I think we need to return the Trump tax cut windfall back to Kansans. I think it's extremely important that we do that, put the money back in the pockets of the people who are going to spend it and keep it cycling through our economy. I also think that economic development incentives in the state of Kansas need a really good and thorough looking at. I think currently we don't have the tools that are necessary to attract good jobs to our communities. Typically, what happens is we end up passing very specific bills or appropriation measures to finalize big economic development incentives, such as what happened down at Spirit, where we put $6.5 million towards educating a workforce for 1,000 new jobs. Those things shouldn't require the legislature. We should have the programs in place that don't fill up binders and binders to offer businesses that are going to come here and create a large number of jobs.
So a number of drivers that are there. The biggest one, again, is all of us. Outside of the government realm is where a lot of the drivers will continue to happen, and to pretend we have the special sauce that will fix it or anything would be an overstatement. But the tax policy is one, and as low as it can be is useful to keep that going. The economic incentives and our folks that drive economic plans and growth programs, those are key. How do we make them work? And overall, I think one of the things that's important for us is to stay out of the way, so that we really look at the actual consequences of good ideas and what that could do. We look at paperwork that we require, not just from industry, but how much we require of schools and special ed. Is there a way that we can allow people to continue to focus on the productive part rather than adding more challenges to their way of actually getting stuff done?
I think the key here is what are people looking for that want to move to Kansas to start a business or continue one that's maybe a nationally labeled business. The biggest thing they're going to look at are the schools. They want to know what type of education possibilities that their children, if they come here and move their business here, that they're going to be adequately funded enough that they can get adequate education and go on to the higher education in K-State, KU, some of the smaller colleges as well. And I think that's a big key. Being a realtor, I know that not only am I showing possibilities of people who want to come here, start small businesses, they want to know, that's one of the first questions that they ask. They want to know, what are your schools like? Are my kids going to get the adequate education and the equity and the adequacy? And I think that is where the key is, and that's why it's so important that we make sure that those schools are funded properly.
I think as long as we're investing in the right spots, well, we'll set our economy up to continue to grow. Infrastructure is something we hear a lot about, and I would support a good, robust infrastructure program. If we can get some good jobs into these smaller communities where they're building highways and different things like that, that's a good influx of cash into those small communities of parts stores and restaurants, hotels, things like that will certainly benefit from things like that. Obviously, we need to continue to have a good, solid education program in the state. Our building trades, or the trade schools also need to be doing well. So with all that, I think we'll continue to grow our economy and hopefully attract some people from out of state.
Todd, this will be our last question before we move on to the audience questions.
The question periodically comes up. I'll ask the marijuana question. Would you be in favor of maybe rolling back some of the Kansas marijuana laws? Other states have done it. Would you be in favor of rolling back the laws at a minimum, allowing the use of medicinal marijuana in Kansas?
So this has had a lot of discussion, and I've gotten to work on a lot of the different parts of issues related to hemp, et cetera. I do support the medical use of marijuana. What I would like to see us do is actually have the FDA approve it and distribute it just like we do any other narcotics that we have as tools. So it's one more thing that's there. I'd like to have doses that are specific, because if I needed something, I don't want to go test myself. I like somebody to say, this is what you need. But having that as an alternative to the opioids and the problem that is there, that's the route that I really would like to go, to be able to get that available to the people that need it here and across the country, do it consistently and safely. Some small laws that we can repeal can deal with who do we want to lock up, et cetera, and that becomes another question that we also have done some steps, but can probably do more.
I am certainly in favor. I have seen families actually pick up and have to move to Colorado so that they can get the type of medication, just even the medicinal marijuana for their kids who are suffering from seizures. I had one sit in my office, and this poor woman was trying to hold on to her little boy, and it was just one seizure after another. And they eventually just had to move to Colorado in order to get them, and we should not have to have them do that. You want to bring people to Kansas, you don't want them to exit. So in mirroring what Representative Johnson said, you know, with the opioids and things like that, I think the medicinal marijuana, I think it's time that we just get it passed and see what happens.
I also am in favor of medicinal marijuana or cannabis. I think plenty of research and studies have shown that it is effective and it is something that we could use as a medication. I recently was talking to somebody that had to, in fact, move to Colorado in order to get this product, but then once they got there, they realized that they cannot afford to live in Colorado and moved back just across the border and got in a little bit of trouble with it. So their troubles just kept compounding on top of each other. It's ridiculous. We need to end that. And then, like Representative Johnson said, decide who we're going to lock up for a little bit of pot on recreational side. Let's just move forward with this.
Absolutely support the medical use under a doctor's supervision. I won't add to what everyone else said, but I think it's pretty clear we're in agreement on that.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate your questions. And Anne has been feverishly up here sorting your questions and circling, and so we don't have duplicate questions. So, Miss Anne.
Thank you. Well, we have about 20 questions. We have about time for about 8 of them, so we'll see how this goes. There were some that had already been answered in the first part, so I am skipping those, and some that were duplicates. So let me start with this one. Do you support the state of Kansas lawsuit against the federal government to eliminate the Affordable Care Act, parts of the Affordable Care Act, and why or why not? Who am I ready for? I'm sorry, I lost track. Diana? Thank you.
Would you
Yes.
repeat that, please?
Well, let me start by saying that there is a lawsuit filed by our Attorney General along with several other state attorney generals against the federal government to eliminate requirements of the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, sometimes called Obamacare. So Kansas is part of that lawsuit. Do you support Kansas being a part of that lawsuit, and why or why not?
I had to go first, okay. If it, to be real honest with you, I haven't really been following that very closely right now because it really hasn't had an impact on us, but whatever impact that would have on our state, it has to be positive. And I think that our leadership, such as the Attorney General, I think I would leave that question up to what prospects that would bring, what barriers it would cause, and I just need to follow that a little bit more closely once if it would be introduced to us, or anybody in the audience would have some ideas on that. I would certainly appreciate their thoughts as well.
Thank you, Jarrett.
I'm more interested in expanding access to health care, and that's why I'm a proponent of actually expanding Medicaid as well. There's thousands of people in our district that could benefit today from the expansion of Medicaid. We're leaving money out there on the table. It's our tax dollars that are being sent out of state. They're being spent somewhere else. It's our money. We need it here. I'm supporting expanded Medicaid.
JR.
Not being familiar with the lawsuit, it's difficult to answer on the specifics of whether I support it or not, but I would just say that there are provisions that I do support, things like coverage of pre-existing conditions and some of the issues such as that. So I would hesitate to say that I support or don't support a lawsuit I'm not familiar with, but pending some more information might be able to answer that.
Stephen?
So I also am not familiar with it, but we're looking at what little I know. If it was the $142 million about the provider fee that is at issue, that Attorney General Derek Schmidt took and recently did receive that, saying that $142 million would be returned if indeed those monies were taken inconsistently, should not have been taken from the Kansans that it was taken, and the federal court found that. I think that I would probably support that if it was, Derek has generally been fairly reasonable in those, and if it was supported in the federal court. Anyway, but if it dealt with something else, I don't know.
Okay, let me try a better one. How can money let's see, we're starting with Jarrett this time? Yes. How can money for the highway fund be restored, and do you support that?
Transportation is the lifeblood of many of our producers in the state of Kansas, many of our factories interstate. We depend on these highways. We depend on highways getting our cattle to market, getting our kids to school. Yes, I absolutely support returning that money to the highway fund. I don't know what else I'll say about that, but yes, I support that.
Thank you. JR?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, just this last session added $57 million back into the State Highway Fund to complete the T-Works program. There are 2 transfers that are stopped to allow that to happen. So it ends up being over $100 million that's put back towards completion of the T-Works program. I think that's really something that's very important as we start looking to the next program that I'm a part of crafting in the Transportation Vision Task Force, is that we complete T-Works, that we complete that promise. There are several projects that are in the pipeline, 8 of them, I believe, that are going back online so that we can get those accomplished. But then also just what does the preservation of that system look like, and what does that mean for us? Several projects here in Saline County that need to be accomplished. We also have a 1950s interchange at I-135 and I-70 that needs to be addressed at some point for safety reasons. If any of you travel on it, you know what I'm talking about. But that kind of thing has to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed in a way that is funded and is not available for others to use as a piggy bank.
Stephen?
So I do support restoring that, and Representative Clay's sharing transportation budget had led a lot of those things. Not only that, but other areas to be able to get monies for fixing infrastructure and maintenance. I would like to fund at a level where we do fund maintenance on an ongoing basis rather than having to borrow on that. As we go to the next level, which would be expansion, that is more on the table to say, okay, now do I need more money for mental health? Do I need more money for K-12? Do I need more money for higher ed? But we've got to be able to get transportation back to a level where we are at least funding our ongoing maintenance along with the rest of the budget.
Diana?
Well, having been invited by one of the leaders of T-Works in the middle of the I-70 during traffic when they were looking at the bridge that was crumbling underneath, I thought I was going to get sucked up and never see you guys again. But it is very important, not only commercially for the truck traffics that come through and the people who come through Kansas, people who want jobs here, but it's the safety issue. And after having that experience and seeing what's going on with some of our roads and highways, it's definitely that we need to continue to fund transportation equally as important, you know, and keeping our roads safe and having some commercial traffic as well.
Thank you. So we start with JR on this. I think, what can you say about teacher due process and whether it should be restored and how that should be done?
Sure, big believer in local control. So we have the ability at the local level for local school boards to decide whether or not they're going to offer that and whether they're going to have it in their contracts, and it's a negotiable point. So I believe that that's important for it to be locally decided.
Stephen, I think you're next.
So this is one where I did vote in the House to restore due process this year. I think the school board is the right place to decide that, but I want to tell the teachers that they are a valued part of what we attempt to do in the state and probably our most critical workforce. So hearing that it was important to them was what made me willing to say, this is a key driver. If this would help drive satisfaction, if this would help us get or keep the talent that we need, then it's important. And that was what affected my decision on that one. Otherwise, it's not an entity, it's not something I would normally say, oh, this is my main issue. But I think it was a main issue for my constituents, and that's why I did vote for it.
Diana.
If you had been at the State House when they had the KNEA convention or group meetings and saw all those teachers once again sitting on those cold marble floors with their red shirts on and waiting for the House to pass the bill, then it passed, and then they waited till the very last minute on the Senate. And it's ludicrous that, you know, so many people are there and so many people in our constituency are saying, please get the due process back, and we can't seem to get it with everybody agreeing. We get it passed and then it doesn't. So we're still going to keep working on that. It's a very important venture. It really is.
Thank you. Jarrett.
School boards and communities should have the opportunity to control locally as much as they possibly can. But this is an issue that I believe that should be something that is statewide and that should be decided in the legislature. I think it's really important for our young teachers to know that they have that security, to at least get that process if something were to come up or something to happen. So I would be in support of reinstating due process.
Thank you. The next question is regarding the national economy and its effect on the state. And I'm paraphrasing a couple of questions here. The national economy, or the Trump economy, as it was referred to once at least here, seems to be booming, and yet the agricultural sector is suffering to some extent for that. What would you say should be done to support our farmers in our rural economies? And we're going to start with Stephen.
So clearly the trade issue is front and center for the ag groups, but I think we may be premature in looking at solutions. I won't sell all of my beans across the scale. I don't know when that will be settled, and I think we'll know what harm there is actually in the future. So even the payments that were set up, while I appreciate the concept and I should jump up and down and say more, the reality is I think we need to look at what any impact actually is. If everything is solved by January, and maybe is an overly rosy picture, but we might have a relatively small issue. Ag commodities are not just sold at a point in time, and it's over time, and we have to make sure that we look at what it is at the end.
Diana?
The agricultural segment of Kansas, this is their bread and butter. These are the people who have been here for generations and generations. This year, the farmers have been struck twice, once with 26 bushel per acre of wheat because of the lack of moisture. In our ag economy, they're struggling. They're just hanging on, and hopefully with the rains that we have had here recently is going to at least let them get into the field to get the milo out, because it's been very wet. But I think that whatever issues that come before us as a legislative body, that we should make sure that the farmers are having as much help as we can possibly give them, because really that is the key mark for the state of Kansas.
Yeah, as a state, we need to be able to make sure that our farmers are on solid footing as much as possible. One thing I'd like to really look at and explore further is making hemp more available as a crop. I know it could be used for lots of different things like rope and textiles, and just a conversation I was having earlier today, it sounds like as of right now with the way we're kind of moving, there's going to be a lot of hoops to jump through. It's going to be extremely expensive, and I'm not sure there's much of a market right now for it. But as we move forward, maybe we can improve on all that and see if we can't give our producers another option out in the field.
I'll just expand a little bit on what Stephen was talking about. I think it is important that we support our farmers. We are an ag economy, and it's a huge part of what we do here in the state of Kansas. It also means that we need to support transportation to get those goods to market. But beyond that, when we start looking at markets overseas and to the north and south, it means having good trade agreements that benefit the folks here in Kansas. And if it takes a little while to get there, then I think that's what we need to do for the overall long-term impact of having like a new U.S., Mexico, Canada trade agreement. I mean, those things are good for us, and they're good for the U.S. So I think that we should stand with our president, who is renegotiating those deals, and get better deals for America.
Next question. There are broadcast ads flooding the airways claiming that public schools waste large sums of money on administration. Do you agree with that or not? And what can you say about those ads? Diana.
Well, if you pick up this 17-page synopsis that I put together, it gives you exactly the numbers, and I believe that I did read those off, that there's a difference between classroom and instruction. Classrooms, instruction. Instruction is the actual instruction of our kids, and that's where the money is going, and 53.6%. And when you're talking about administration, is 2.1%. So you can see that the majority of those percentages are in classroom and in instruction. And please feel free to take a copy of that with you, because I think you'll be amazed at the numbers that we are really, truly getting instruction. There's special ed, all of those services that are needed within the school district and the schools themselves, that we really need to watch for that. But the instruction is 53.6% at this time.
Thank you, Jarrett.
Representative Dirks, are those statewide numbers or statewide numbers? Okay, I think I was just looking at 305, what's going on here in 305, and about 95% or 90% is going into support students. About 64.9% of that is actually in the classroom instruction. So that counts everything it takes to educate a child. So the utilities, transportation, the individual school administrators, food services, things like that. 9.5% of the USD 305 budget actually goes to administration and different things like that, like finance and facilities, maintenance, things like that. I want to make sure that when we have this discussion, we're having discussions with real numbers and not listening to the hype that you mentioned earlier. You know, we had Chris Kobach going around talking about how Wichita had a school district that had like 12 assistant principals or something, when, you know, that just was not true. And I think a lot of people are hearing some of this and getting really nervous about the way it's being spent.
Thank you. JR?
Well, I'm a cord cutter, so I haven't seen any ads that say we waste money on administration. I think administration is an important part of delivering the services that school districts are required to deliver. It's certainly not something that's a waste necessarily, but I do think that more dollars could be directed towards classroom spending, if that's the real crux of the question, without the hyperbole involved of waste. I think that dollars in classroom instruction are what have the impact on student success, and that's exactly where those dollars should go. So I don't know about the ads, because again, I don't have cable TV or whatever, but yeah.
Stephen?
So short answer is no, I would not support those ads. I'm not a fan of the ads that, and I don't know that I know the exact one, but that have a part of a view, because it's hard to get the whole picture from that. On administration, et cetera, I think we rely on our school boards to make good decisions about how to allocate that. And I had a meeting in Hutchinson yesterday, and I don't know if I can get through it in a minute, but I had two people that I'd worked with previously as colleagues. One was a Republican, one was a Democrat. Both of them were married to special education teachers. And I just said, how much, and we had talked about a number of things. I said, how much time does your spouse have to spend on paperwork? The percent was really high. And actually, that would indicate that I need more administrators to help me with that paperwork so that my instructor could be focused on the instruction job. So I think we have to look at a number of things that we have to try and figure out how to best deliver the education service.
Thank you. The next question bounces right off of that one. Special ed is not being funded nearly up to the percentage that the law requires. How would you work to support the needs for special ed and to meet the legal requirements? Starting with Jarrett.
Oh.
I think, yes?
Is it?
Wasn't it? I'd start the last one with, yes.
Okay.
With Diana, yes. Want me to repeat it? Sorry.
Yes, please.
Okay, sorry. Special ed is still not being funded according to the law, not nearly the percentage required. How would you work to support the needs for special ed students and to meet the legal requirements of special ed?
I would have to be honest and say that I don't know exactly what the legal needs are, but obviously, should I be elected, that would be one thing that I would definitely be interested in talking to people about. If there's a legal need to fund special needs, then that's what our obligation is, and that's what we will do.
Yeah, absolutely support full funding for special education. My brother is a school psychologist, and there's a certain provision in there where we were looking to add, I think, somewhere around 700, someone correct me if they have the exact number, 700 or so school psychologists across the state of Kansas, because the level of workload that's being put on them is just simply too much to get through all the IEPs and testing and the things that they're required to do. So, yeah, absolutely support full funding of special education.
Stephen.
So as we get back to special ed, clearly is part of, and a big part and a critical part of education funding. And where are we and how do we add more to the education funding piece, which has also been another question. If it is then the special education piece that I most want to add, I don't know that I can say, oh yeah, no problem, we can fully fund that. How does that work in concert with the other pieces? There is a percentage of the total special education need that has been funded for several years. It's not 100%. I assume that that is what the question is. And I don't know what our partners in education's priority is to say that's what we most want next, or the other list of items that might be there. Perhaps that's the only one. And if it is, then it's easy to say, yeah, that's the next one that we do. But if it's not, we need to see how we move all of those things together.
Diana.
I guess you're going to hear it from me again. Okay. There was a definition here of instruction excludes student support. Programs such as counseling, health, social workers, special education services not provided by classrooms, teachers such as speech pathology, libraries, media center, technology support, professional development, transportation, food services. These are all services that make the core of our educational system grow. And without it, and without being adequately funded, we're going to lose some of those services, and these kids are not going to get the benefit of a full education that perhaps one of their colleagues who may not have special needs are being able to get, because these kids need some special attention. So yes, I fully support increasing the social services funding in our schools.
Thank you. The next question deals with an issue we just had a lunch and learn on this month for the League of Women Voters. I didn't write this question, but I recognize the issue. Saline County kids in foster care. Let's see, JR, you're going to be the first one here, right? Is that where we are? Okay. Saline County kids in foster care have dramatically increased. The number of them have dramatically increased in the last 7 years, which coincides exactly with the decrease in temporary assistance for needy families and the decrease in the child care tax credit, which happened as a part of the Brownback budget cuts. What would you do to remedy the foster care crisis? JR.
Yeah, there's no doubt that there is a crisis in our foster care system. DCF had recently undergone a change in leadership, and I think that that's starting to bend the curve back towards transparency and looking at what other states are doing, trying to lower the number of people who are, we had something like 70 kids who were missing at one point, who had left the foster care system or who were in foster care, and finding, where they are located now and going through that process. But I think DCF is on the right track, the path that they're on. TANF, that's certainly available to people. I'm not sure exactly what the cut is that's being referenced, but would be happy to address that if there's something specific that's in regard to the foster care system. But that's not something that I was aware of.
Stephen?
So I don't go as deep on that particular area, but the review that I have had of the DCF, the Department of Children and Families budget, would show that that is one where shortage of funds is driving a lot of problems. Unfortunately, it does take resources. I am not sure that we are funding at a threshold level where they can operate and do their job. So I don't know that that's the case, but I think the first thing that we do need there is money. We need good leadership. That's going to take money. And I think we have good leadership there now. But beyond that, I don't know what the next issues are that we need to try to address to do better. I think that's the first one.
Diana?
My husband always says to me, ever since we've been married, it's all about the money, honey. Sorry, honey. The biggest concern of mine with working with DCF is that we are not adequately funding them. And when you look at, again, looking at cutting taxes, cutting spending, the spending, it's going to be programs that the DCF contain, like the foster care. There are kids out there who need to be taken care of by individuals who will give them the love and guidance that they need and not have them remain in homes where they are in endangerment of physical abuse, both socially, physical. And so we need to make sure that the revenue stream that has been increasing since the change in the tax plan is now going to be able to perhaps build a little bit more of a base so that they have some funds available when a crisis hits. And we need to continue in that effort and not cut taxes and cut spending once again.
Thank you. Jarrett?
The children are the most vulnerable among us, and we have to do what we can to help support them. Can you imagine what it's like for these children to try to get a good education when they're starving, or when they're constantly being moved from one school to another because housing isn't stable for them? We have to find a way to support them, and I would support raising the funding in that, finding a way to raise it.
Thank you. We're starting with Stephen this time. Yes. Did you vote for, or would you have voted for, the bill that allowed adoption agencies to prevent adoption by members of the community who identify as LGBT?
Well, there was an Adoption Protection Act, and that was a no-win vote. You either voted to say, I don't believe Catholics should be able to adopt, or you perceived on other things. I wonder what that bill started with, because it got such a backlash through that. The reality is what the bill that we had the chance to vote on did was say we will continue to use Catholic Charities, which is our second largest provider of adoption services, and we recognize that we can't change how they would discriminate to do that. And they discriminate on a few, in my opinion, a few different things. The chair of the committee's son had wanted to adopt. He and his wife, they did not because they were of childbearing age, so they could not adopt through that agency. However, I think there are loving Catholic families that can adopt, and for that reason, I think continuing to use Catholic Charities does have a place in the state. It's a longer than a minute discussion.
Diana?
I agree that is certainly longer than a minute discussion. After that bill was presented, I visited with the head of the Catholic Charities here in Salina and really got a feel for exactly what's going out there. I'm totally against any type of discrimination, whether they're black, white, Hispanic, old, young, whatever. And I think we have to look at what comes first, and that is the care of our kids. They have great services, and at that point, it was delivered at a very late hour, and I did not have all the information that I needed in order to give an affirmative vote on that. So I did vote negatively until I could decide whether or not this is going to be beneficial to the people that I serve.
Jarrett.
I would not support something that would deny a loving home to a child that needs it. That's all I got to say about that.
JR.
Yeah, we need more adoptions, not fewer, and I fully support having Catholic Charities continue to provide adoptions in the state of Kansas, and I voted that way.
Next question. I think we are, shall we do the last one? This be the last one? Let's do it. Okay. Okay, this is the last question. Which of these three should I do? Okay. What are your thoughts and ideas on how to improve local and state economic development programs? Who's our starters? I think it's Diana. Yes.
I think with the answers that I've given on previous questions, you know how I feel about local control and getting people to come to Kansas by adequately funding our schools, developing an economic program that will entice those larger companies to come here. We need something besides restaurants. We need something that are better than just minimum wage jobs. We need to be able to encourage these companies to come here, and we have adequate resources. I think they're going to look at all aspects of our state. Are we adequately funding our schools? Are we adequately funding programs in our educational system that will get these kids ready to go and go to work when they get out of school? Not everybody's going to go to college, but we have the trade schools. We have great trade schools right here in Salina, and we need to support them. And I think by doing that, we're going to prove to these companies who want to come in that we have the workforce that will be trained well enough that they can fit right into their slots. And I think that will keep.
Thank you. Jarrett?
I think it starts with good schools, well-educated children, well-educated graduates, I should say, good wages, and quality of life is what everybody's looking for. But then to continue to build on that, going back to the hemp thing, I think we can get on the ground floor of hemp production. Like I said earlier, I don't think there's much of a market for it now, but if we can continue that and get that going, maybe that can help out our economy quite a bit.
JR.
First thing I'd do is I'd make the Department of Commerce a public-private economic development organization instead of having a Department of Commerce. I don't think that we need it. Those functions could be run out of revenue, administration, and labor while we had the people searching for and recruiting jobs be a public-private partnership. Second, I would create an aerospace commission rather than having KDOT Aviation in KDOT. I think that's not the place for it. It needs its own funding stream and also its own mission outside of KDOT. I would also take a look at all of our economic incentives and replace many of them with refundable tax credits. I think that's a better way to recruit jobs when you tie jobs to refundable tax credits. If you'd like to stick around afterwards, I've got a 30-minute PowerPoint on this topic I'd be happy to share.
Stephen.
And Representative Clays has done a lot with commerce. I also liked his idea of an incubator for here in Salina. Those types of things I think are very helpful. At the state level, I think combining does make sense. I would really like to have good data that just shows us what is our return on any programs that we have. So how do we invest well in the best programs that do actually drive jobs, that keep people in the state, and not tie the hands of our local economic development directors, but really partner with them to try and find solutions that could move forward.
You made it. Okay, 1 minute closing remarks from each one. And Diana, would you mind starting, please?
Once again, thank you all for attending this evening, and I hope that you were able to assimilate with what we're trying to do here in Topeka, and you have representatives there that are really diligently trying their best to make sure that every aspect of our state continues and grows. And by you being here shows that you have an interest, a real true interest. And I'm so glad that you had some really tough questions, and hope that they were answered favorably in your opinion. So thank you once again for being here, and that itself says a lot.
I'd like to thank all the representatives for letting me sit up here amongst them. And thanks to the Chamber and the League of Women Voters for having us. Thanks to the media panel and everybody for coming out tonight. I want to just end by saying again that I spent the entire summer knocking on doors, talking to voters, and the real main issues that people want to talk about is expanding Medicaid and making sure that our public schools are fully funded. I heard it time and time again. I heard it from Democrats, Republicans, and unaffiliated voters. That's the message that I want to carry. The 69th District is a very diverse regionally district. We've got some rural parts of the district, and then we got this long kind of district. I look forward to representing everybody in the district. I plan to make myself available to everybody. I'm going to listen to your concerns and see if we can work together and solve some of these problems. Again, I'm Jarrett Morris, and I appreciate your vote. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again to the Salina Chamber of Commerce, the League of Women Voters, our timekeepers, of course, our moderators, and our question askers, and the entire audience for coming out tonight. It's a little drizzly day, so appreciate you coming through that. I appreciate your vote on November 6th. We have I think we only have 12 days left, if my math is right. But it's definitely been a pleasure to go door to door and to talk to folks about what the issues are that are facing Salina and Saline County. I've been your representative for 6 years, been working hard to bring good paying jobs to Salina. I think we're on the cusp of some really great things when it comes to the aviation industry. We have a couple of top schools in the nation here, our aviation school and our UAS program at K-State Polytechnic, one of the top 3 in the nation, Salina Tech, one of the top 10 in the nation in tech schools. We have a well-trained workforce that is ready for the jobs of the 21st century, and we need to start working to bring those jobs here. So I'm delighted to be a part of that, and I'd respectfully ask for your vote on November 6th. Thank you.
So thanks to all of you for being here, and I hope that we can continue the discussion through the election and as we go forward. It is everybody at the table that will help us to figure out what are the biggest and best next steps that we take together across parties, across groups. Today I was lucky to be at a number of things. KU had a tax conference, great to both talk and listen there. Some folks at KDADS had some needs that they talked about. The aviation group actually has some great ideas to continue, takes money. The Leadership Kansas class had a discussion on tax and education funding in Topeka. All of those are great forums. And even here, we talked about a number of different things where we could invest, and in each of them, we could invest wisely. And we can absolutely do at least some of them. But exactly which ones and in which degree gives us a great opportunity to continue the dialogue, and I thank you for the chance to hear from you tonight.
Thank you very much. On behalf of Joyce Vogt and the Chamber of Volk and the Chamber of Commerce and the League of Women Voters, I want to thank the candidates for coming. Let's give them a hand. And thank you all for coming. And be sure and vote before or on November 6th. Thank you very much.